The rain had stopped, but the scent of wet soil still lingered in the air. In a battered pickup truck parked deep within the forest, a man sat in silence, muscles tense, mind alert. John was no stranger to violence. Once a ghost in the shadows of black operations, he had disappeared from the world to bury a past soaked in blood. But when he stumbled upon two terrified girls fleeing from something unspeakable, the silence of his exile shattered. Now, hunted by a cold-blooded assassin, betrayed by the very system sworn to protect the innocent, and haunted by the echoes of a family he once destroyed, John is forced into a fight he never wanted, one where bullets aren't the only weapons, and time is the most lethal enemy. This isn't just a rescue mission. It's redemption written in blood. The forest stood still in the creeping fog of early dawn, its silence only broken by the occasional snap of a twig beneath a boot or the distant hoot of an owl retreating from the light. Dew clung to the leaves, catching the pale sunlight in trembling droplets. The trees were tall and dense, the kind of place where the wind whispered secrets, and every shadow could be a threat. And within this vast labyrinth of pine and oak, a man was hunting. Reed moved with the silence of a ghost, his breath controlled, his body a shadow. He wasn't dressed like a mercenary or an assassin from a cheap thriller, no all-black uniform or ridiculous night vision goggles. Just a worn army green jacket, jeans, and boots, every inch of him blending into the woodland. A combat knife was strapped to his thigh, and a suppressed pistol nestled inside his belt holster. But his most dangerous weapon wasn't visible, it was his mind. Carl Boone hadn't needed to explain much when he summoned Reed. Two girls. Escaped. The man who took them, John Ellis. Military background. I want them back. Alive. I don't give a damn what happens to him. Reed hadn't asked questions. He never did. He tracked targets through the jungles of Colombia, the snows of Belarus, and the wastelands of Afghanistan. But this was personal in its own quiet way. Carl Boone wasn't just a client. Boone was a gatekeeper to something Reed owed. A debt. A past sin that still whispered to him in the dark. So when Boone said bring them back, Reed had set out like a machine. Now he was deep in the Appalachian foothills, moving through trees with calculated precision. He knelt by a moss-covered rock, eyes scanning the clearing ahead. There, beside a tree root, something glinted. A soda can. Crushed and smeared with dirt, but recent. The pull tab was still attached, and faint condensation marks suggested it had only been discarded hours ago. He knelt, unzipping a pocket on his sleeve. Out came a tiny forensic light. He shone it across the can, fingerprints. Small. 2 sets. Child-sized. His lips curled slightly, not quite a smile, more a dark acknowledgement. He stood, pulling a handheld device from his bag. A GPS tracker. Not to track a beacon, John wasn't that sloppy, but to mark his own progress. Every clue, every shift in terrain. He moved forward, his senses expanding with each step. Half a mile ahead, he found it. Ash. Burned wood. A makeshift fire pit under a ring of stones. Still warm. Reed squatted low, pressing the back of his fingers into the ashes. Just slightly above ambient temperature. The fire had been out for no more than 4 hours. John was close. He scanned the area. The camp had been carefully disguised, branches pulled over it, dirt scattered. But a man can never truly erase presence, only delay discovery. Reed's gaze drifted to a series of faint depressions in the earth leading into the thicker brush. Tracks. Adult male. Heavy. Tread marks from boots. 2 smaller sets alongside him. Children. He followed, inch by inch, his footsteps exact replicas of the ones before him, leaving no new marks. As the forest deepened, the air grew cooler. Sunlight barely touched the ground now. Shadows draped over everything like a funeral cloth. He paused suddenly. A piece of red thread caught on a thorn bush. He extracted it with tweezers. Cotton. Part of a hoodie, maybe? A child's. Probably the younger girl. He remembered the photos Boone had given him, one child with a red sweatshirt and tangled hair, maybe 6 years old. The older one, blonde and silent. 11 or 12. He pocketed the thread and moved again. At the cabin. Meanwhile, nestled deep within a hidden glade, the old hunting cabin lay quiet. Its wooden walls were weather-worn and faded gray, but it stood solid. Inside, John was pacing. He couldn't shake the feeling. Something was off. The girls, Ava and Lily, were curled on the old couch, wrapped in blankets. Ava was asleep, her head nestled against Lily's side. Lily was staring at the boarded-up window, as if she too sensed something. A child's instinct was rarely wrong. John checked the barricades. The tripwire traps he'd set were still untouched. The perimeter alarms, tin cans on strings, makeshift noise triggers, were in place. He'd even dug a false trail to the east, scattered some worn clothing in food wrappers to lure a tracker off the real path. But John had been hunted before. And he knew how it felt when eyes were on you. He opened a floorboard near the fireplace, pulling out a duffel. Inside, an old service revolver, ammo, a military radio he hadn't used in years, and one final thing, a locket. His daughters. Not these girls. Another lifetime. Another heartbreak. He looked back at them. So small. So frightened. Ava had cried herself to sleep the night before. Lily hadn't spoken since they arrived, except to whisper once, "Will he find us?" John had said no. He hoped it wasn't a lie. The hunter nears. Reed was close now. Less than half a mile. The tracks were fresh. He moved in a zigzag, avoiding possible traps. Then he saw it, thin wires glinting under the brush. A tripwire. Clever. Would have rattled cans and alerted the cabin. He disarmed it with barely a thought, stepping over it like a dancer. Then he caught scent, smoke, faint and carried on the breeze. He paused. Inhaled. Pine smoke. Cabin smoke. He scanned the trees. A crow flew past, startled by something. From its angle, northwest. That was it. Reed crept to a small rise and crouched. There. The cabin. Partially hidden behind a grove of sycamores, nestled into the slope like a secret. Smoke curling from a vented pipe. No movement. But he didn't need movement. He already knew they were inside. He pulled binoculars from his belt and scanned. There, movement inside. A man's shadow pacing. Then two smaller figures. Target confirmed. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a small earpiece. Tapped once. "I found them," he said softly. Carl Boone's voice crackled on the other end. "Alive?" "Yes." "All three." "Good. Kill the man. Bring the girls." Reed's eye narrowed. "Understood." The stone breaks. The first shot shattered the cabin window. John dove instantly, rolling over the girls and shoving them behind the couch. Glass rained down like hail. The second shot ripped through the wood above the fireplace. Then silence. Reed had fired 2 test shots, from distance. Suppressed, but audible. John grabbed his revolver, scanned the perimeter. "Stay down," he hissed. Lily nodded, pulling Ava close, shielding her with her body. John peered through the bullet hole. The tree was still. Nothing moved. But he knew that was the point. The bastard was toying with him. He had to move. He grabbed the duffel, tossed it to Lily. "Take your sister. Crawl through the back trapdoor. Follow the white markers. There's a stream. Hide under the bank. I'll find you." "What about you?" Lily's voice was thin. "I'm right behind you. Go." As soon as they slipped out, John ducked low, grabbed a flare from the mantel, and lit it. Red smoke erupted. He tossed it out the front window, then dashed out the back. The red flare screamed into the woods, and Reed, watching from behind a log, narrowed his eyes. Decoy. He moved, fast. But John was already waiting. From the side of the cabin, John fired once, clean. It missed by inches. Reed ducked, rolled, came up behind a fallen tree. His silencer whispered a reply, grazing John's shoulder. John grunted and fell behind the woodpile. Reed advanced. Each step deliberate. Each angle covered. He was 10 meters away now. Then, a tripwire snapped. John's backup plan. The explosive popped, not lethal, but loud. Reed staggered, dazed. John rushed forward, tackling him. They crashed into the leaves, fists swinging. Reed fought like a machine, precise, cold. But John had something else, desperation. They rolled, hitting tree trunks and rocks. Blood smeared the dirt. Reed pulled his knife. John blocked with a branch, slammed it into Reed's throat. The assassin gasped. John grabbed the pistol, aimed. But Reed was gone, slipped into the shadows again. Final breath. By the time John reached the stream, his shoulder was soaked in blood. The girls were there, shivering under the roots of an old tree. He collapsed beside them. "Are we safe?" Ava asked, her eyes wide. John forced a smile. "For now." Behind them, in the shadows of the forest, Reed crouched, watching. Waiting. Wounded, but alive. And the hunt was far from over. The dim glow of the campfire flickered across Sophie's face, the older of the two girls, barely 10 years old, as she sat close to John inside the damp, run-down cabin in the middle of the woods. Wind howled through the rotting wooden slats, carrying with it the rustle of leaves like ghostly whispers. John silently added another log to the fire, his eyes never leaving the two trembling children wrapped in a thin blanket. Every move he made was careful, calculated. One stray sound could be fatal. Sophie looked down at her hands, gripping a scrap of paper torn from John's old notebook. On it, she had scrawled some numbers, her writing shaky and unsure. These were fragmented memories, buried deep inside her, from a time when she was nothing more than a product cataloged by monsters. "How much do you remember?" John asked quietly, his voice calm and steady. Sophie bit her lip, her eyes moist. "I'm not sure. I think it was 8 digits. I saw them once when a doctor pulled me out of the testing room. On a screen. I remember 5, 8, 2, then maybe 1, but I don't know the order." John nodded. "That's more than enough, Sophie." Sarah, the younger girl, just 7, pressed herself closer to her sister, clutching her hand like it was her only lifeline. Every time a branch creaked outside, all three froze. But none of them knew that less than 2 kilometers away, a shadow moved silently through the trees, a predator trained to end lives without hesitation. Reed, the predator. Reed knelt beneath an ancient tree, fingers brushing against a damp leaf. A few meters away, the faint outline of a child's footprint was etched in the soft mud. He smiled, cold, calculated. "You're close now," he whispered. He carried no scent, no sweat, no gunpowder. It was as if he belonged to the forest, a ghost of the dark. His hand grazed the silenced pistol at his side, and he instinctively adjusted the coat sleeve that hid the scar running from his wrist to elbow, a reminder of betrayal from the same organization he now served with ruthless loyalty. An hour ago, he found a discarded soda can only sold in the nearby city. Before that, a few warm embers. John, in his fatigue, had left a trail. Inside the cabin, Sophie's panic. Sophie jolted awake, her back drenched in sweat. In her dream, she saw the sterile white room and heard the buzz of machines. A metal door opened, and a man in a mask shouted at her, "Remember it, you stupid girl. If you forget that code, you're worthless." She gasped, clutching the note to her chest. John sat up immediately. "Sophie? You okay?" "I think I remember another number. 3. It started with 3. 3, 5, 8, then maybe 2, 1. John froze, then looked at her with a seriousness in his eyes. "If that's the real code, we're not just running to survive. We might be able to bring them down. But they'll catch us before we can do anything, right?" John didn't answer. Reed tightens the net. At the forest edge, Reed paused and raised infrared binoculars. The wooden cabin emerged from the trees like a lump of forgotten time. No smoke. No lights. Too perfect. He pressed a button on his earpiece. "Target located. Approximate 500 meters. Will engage within 20 minutes. Priority, recover the code. Eliminate witnesses." On the other end, Carl Boone's voice hissed like a snake shedding its skin, "If that girl remembers the code, you make damn sure no one else leaves that forest alive. That information dies with them." "Understood." Memories resurface. Inside, John folded the paper carefully and slid it behind a cracked wooden panel in the wall. "If I don't come back, run along the stream. Keep moving until you find a road. Go to any police station." Sophie grabbed his hand. "John. I remember something else." There was a symbol in the bottom corner of the screen, a snake wrapped around a staff. And the word Orion. John frowned. Orion? That name sounds familiar. But he didn't get a chance to think further. A soft snapping sound came from outside, barely audible, but to a trained soldier, it screamed trouble. The confrontation begins. John drew an old pistol from his backpack, only one clip of ammo left. He whispered, "Hold Sarah. Do not open the door unless you hear 3 short knocks and 1 long." He slipped through the back entrance, disappearing into the night. His steps blended with the rhythm of the forest. He knew, if he was even 1 minute late, the killer wouldn't show mercy. Reed counted under his breath, 1, 2, 3, then approached the door like a shadow. Clash in the dark. Under thick foliage, 2 men stood less than 5 meters apart, one a trained killer who never failed, the other a former soldier who tried to leave war behind, now forced to fight again. John fired first. The bullet grazed Reed's ear, making him duck and roll. Reed returned fire, silenced but deadly. Birds exploded from trees as the cabin shuddered from the noise. Inside, Sophie clutched Sarah tightly. The note slipped from her hand, sliding through a gap in the floorboards. Reed lunged forward like a phantom, kicking John's pistol aside. "You think you can hide forever?" "No. But I won't let them live another day in fear." an ending, or a beginning. The fight ended with blood on both sides. John was down, wounded but alive. Reed staggered away, a deep gash bleeding down his arm. Before vanishing into the trees, he cast one last glance at the cabin, knowing the code was still out of reach. Sophie crawled under the floorboards, retrieving the paper. Her eyes lit up as more numbers clicked into place. "I remember the last two, 6 and 7. She whispered under her breath, 3 to 5, 8 to 2, 1 to 6, 7. The secret was no longer a blur. It was a key to truth, to justice. And to a nightmare that wasn't over yet. The sun was still low when John stirred awake. The cabin, hidden deep within the woods, was quiet save for the soft breathing of the two girls asleep on the cot beside him. His body was alert, wired like it always had been, but his mind was adrift, caught between the present and the murky depths of a past he had long buried under blood and silence. Sophie murmured in her sleep, turning over, one tiny hand clutching the hem of her blanket. Her little sister, Lily, lay curled beside her. They looked so fragile, so pure, even after all they'd endured. John stood and walked to the door, opening it slowly, letting in the cool morning air tinged with pine and dew. He stepped outside. The forest surrounded him like a memory. Its silence wasn't peace, it was judgment. He took a deep breath. And then the face returned. The girl had been about Sophie's age. Maybe a little older. Hair dark like nightfall, big eyes filled with terror, and then emptiness. He had seen it in her last breath. That had been over 12 years ago. John sank down on the porch, resting his elbows on his knees, burying his face in his hands. It was a night raid. The intel was wrong. It was supposed to be a cartel compound, hidden in the jungles of Paraguay, a haven for traffickers and narcotics lords. That's what they'd been told. The satellite images confirmed structures. Armed guards. The mission, neutralize. No prisoners. John had led the team. He'd been efficient, surgical. 3 guards dropped before they even knew they were under assault. He slipped in through the rear entrance, his suppressed rifle a phantom. But the building wasn't what they expected. There were no drugs. No weapons cache. Only beds. Toys. School books. And screams. A father grabbed a kitchen knife. Reflexively, John had fired. A mother tried to shield her children. 2 more shots. A child, cowering in the hallway, looked up at him with eyes that pleaded for understanding. He'd pulled the trigger again. Target is down. Only later did they learn the truth. The building had been used as a safe house, temporarily abandoned by the cartel. The family had been squatters. Innocents in the wrong place. The mission file was quietly buried. John was debriefed, commended, and reassigned. He never spoke of it again. But he dreamed of it often. And now there were 2 girls under his protection, and Reed, the bloodhound from his old world, was closing in. He stood up abruptly, shaking the memory off like mud on boots. He didn't have the luxury of guilt. Not now. Back inside, Sophie sat up, rubbing her eyes. "Morning," she whispered. John offered a nod. "We need to move soon." "Are they still looking for us?" He met her gaze. For a moment, he saw that South American child again. "Yes. But we'll stay ahead." Sophie paused. "I remember something." John froze. "It's a number. I don't know why, but I know it's important. It keeps coming back when I sleep. 47, 3, 2 zeros. Then 89. John's pulse quickened. The sequence sounded like a partial key code, exactly the kind of thing you'd need to access encrypted files. She must have seen it at the facility. Maybe the girls were kept near where they stored client data. Carl wouldn't stop until he got that back. "Sophie," he said carefully, "you have to protect that memory, okay? Never say it to anyone but me." Her face went pale, but she nodded. "Why?" "Because it might be the only thing that stops them. The people chasing us, they're not just criminals. They're monsters in suits. And they don't just want you gone. They want to erase every trace of what they've done." She clutched her knees, and John sat beside her. "You're brave. Braver than most adults I've known." She smiled faintly. And for the first time, John didn't see a ghost in her eyes. Later that day, John watched the trees with trained eyes. He spotted signs, broken twigs, faint boot prints. Reed was closer. Too close. He had to buy time. He returned to the cabin, quickly packing supplies. "We're leaving," he said. "Now?" Sophie asked, holding Lily. He nodded. "I'll lead you through a safer path. We'll circle toward the river. But I need you to do exactly what I say." They moved swiftly, silently. John's senses were on fire, every instinct honed by years of jungle ops kicking in. Each snap of a twig behind them was a countdown. Each bird call, or lack thereof, a message. By dusk, they reached a temporary hideout near a ravine. It wasn't ideal, but it would give him the high ground. He dug into his old rucksack and pulled out something he hadn't touched in years, a worn patch with a faded emblem, Task Force Theta, CIA Black Division. He used to wear it like armor. Now, it felt like a scar. He stared at it for a long time before shoving it into his pocket. That night, Sophie lay curled next to Lily in their makeshift shelter. John sat watch, rifle across his lap. He heard something. Not footsteps, breath. Controlled. Measured. Reed was out there. John knew his type. Ex-agents like them didn't just track, they hunted. He was likely close enough now to smell the fire ash still lingering on John's jacket. A branch cracked 30 meters downhill. John aimed but didn't fire. He whispered to the dark, "I know what you are." Silence answered. Then a voice. Cold. Familiar. "You always were too soft, John." John's blood turned to ice. "Still playing hero with kids you should have never saved." John stood slowly. "They're not assets. They're children." Reed stepped into the moonlight, sniper rifle slung, sidearm holstered. He looked leaner than John remembered. More dangerous. "And we were children once. You think that saved us?" Reed scoffed. "Carl wants her alive. But he doesn't care what I do to get her." John raised his gun. "You'll have to go through me." "I was counting on it." They stood still, two ghosts from a past smeared with blood and classified regrets. Then, chaos. Reed lunged forward, fast and deadly. John rolled, avoiding the first blow, returning fire. 2 shots pinged off a nearby rock. Reed dived into the shadows. They traded shots in silence. John moved like water, drawing Reed away from the girls. The forest became a battlefield. Then, a sharp pain, his arm. Reed had clipped him. But John kept moving. At dawn, Reed was gone, but John was bleeding. He limped back to the girls. Sophie's eyes widened. "You're hurt." "I'll live." She helped him sit. Lily, still half asleep, handed him a small cloth. John looked at them. These girls, they weren't ghosts. They were his chance. A chance to fight for something clean. Not for a paycheck. Not for orders. But for peace. He tightened the bandage. The code Sophie carried. Carl would burn entire cities to retrieve it. But John would make sure he burned first. I have to end this, he muttered. Sophie tilted her head. How? John didn't answer. But deep in his heart, a plan was forming. He would become the shadow again. Just once more. But this time, not as a weapon. This time, as a shield. The wind howled outside the cabin, shaking the weathered window panes with a mournful groan. Inside, the dim glow of a fire danced across John's face, its flickering light illuminating the storm brewing behind his eyes. Across the room, Sophie and Lily huddled under a blanket on the old leather couch, their eyes wide with exhaustion and fear. John's mind, however, was elsewhere. His hand hovered over the burner phone he'd found tucked in a lockbox beneath the cabin floorboards. One call. Just one. He could contact the sheriff's department, report the girls, bring the full weight of law enforcement down on Carl Boone and his operation. It should have been that simple. But nothing about this was simple. John's gut told him something was wrong. Earlier that morning, he'd driven to the edge of town before sunrise to pick up supplies, canned goods, a solar charger, antibiotic ointment for Sophie's scrapes. He'd kept his head down and used cash. The old general store was empty except for an elderly woman behind the counter and a heavy-set man browsing magazines. But what chilled him was the bulletin board on the wall. Tacked there between community event flyers was a missing persons poster. Not just one, 6. All children. Girls. Ages between 6 and 13. The ink had barely dried on the most recent sheet. A lump formed in his throat as he realized these weren't isolated cases. This town was drowning in disappearances. And no one seemed to care. No Amber Alerts. No news vans. No national outcry. He recalled a brief exchange with a gas station clerk during his approach into town 3 days ago. Lotta out-of-towners lately, the man had said with a grim look. But they don't always leave the same way they came. At the time, John had dismissed it as backwater paranoia. But now, every nerve in his body screamed otherwise. Sophie stirred. Are you gonna call the police, Mr. John? He turned to her. Her small voice carried a weight no child should bear. She'd watched her world unravel. She deserved justice. She deserved protection. But that was precisely the problem. John swallowed hard and said, "Not yet." He stepped outside onto the cabin's porch and flipped open the phone. He scrolled through the contacts. It was a burner, barely functional, but he'd managed to program in the emergency line. His thumb hovered over the call button. His mind returned to the name he'd heard at the edge of town. Sheriff Miller. He remembered the gas station clerk had said it with a curl of his lip, like something bitter. "Don't bother going to him," the man had muttered. "Miller don't see nothing he don't want to see." That was when the doubt had started. Now, standing under a canopy of stars and cloud-choked moonlight, John couldn't shake it. He needed to know more before putting the girls' lives on the line. With that resolve, he closed the phone and descended the steps into the woods behind the cabin. It was a half-hour's trek to the ridge overlooking the town. From there, with a pair of compact field binoculars, John scoped the sheriff's station. It was past midnight. Most of the building was dark, save for the overhead office light and the sheriff's corner window still glowing. John narrowed his eyes. Through the blinds, a man moved, mid-50s, broad-shouldered, with slick gray hair and a slow, deliberate gait. Sheriff Miller. Then something else. A second figure entered the office. John shifted the lens and stilled. Carl Boone. The bastard stood brazenly, leaning against the doorframe like he owned the place. They shook hands. It wasn't just familiarity, it was routine. Coordination. John's heart pounded. His instincts had been right. The man tasked with protecting the town's children was the very gatekeeper letting them vanish. He watched as Carl passed something to Miller, a manila folder. The sheriff opened it, examined its contents, then nodded and handed Carl a key in return. John backed away slowly, careful not to make a sound. His blood simmered with rage. This changed everything. Back at the cabin, he found Sophie still awake, seated near the fire, knees pulled to her chest. She looked up as he entered. "You didn't call them." "No," he said simply. "Why?" He knelt beside her, his voice low. "Because the man who's supposed to help us is working for Carl Boone." Sophie's eyes widened, and she trembled. John placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "But we're not out of options. There are other people we can trust." "But if we'd called him," his voice darkened, "he'd have brought Carl straight to us." The next day brought more confirmation. Using an old laptop scavenged from the cabin cellar and a USB modem John had kept hidden in his duffel, he ran a search on Sheriff Miller. As expected, the man had no open complaints. In fact, the opposite: commendations, spotless records, glowing reviews. It was too clean. But when John bypassed the public records and dug into local anonymous tip logs, he found something that made his skin crawl. 3 anonymous calls reported suspicious vans near the state border, carrying restrained girls. All 3 were logged. None were followed up. The common thread? They were all under Miller's jurisdiction. All closed due to insufficient evidence. One report had even included license plate numbers. Miller had never run them. Then came the real kicker: bank transactions. Using a backdoor access from his old CIA digital forensics training, John traced offshore deposits in the Caymans, all linked to a shell corporation that listed Timberwood Holdings as a front. It was the same name printed on the side of the van Sophie had escaped from. Miller was not just complacent, he was being paid. That evening, John prepped the girls. "If anything happens to me," he told them, "don't talk to any police unless they show you this." He held up a small laminated card with the Department of Homeland Security seal and a contact number for a field agent he once worked with. "What about Miller?" Lily asked innocently. John crouched before her, voice firm but kind. "You never go near him. Ever." The final confirmation of betrayal came the next morning. As John scouted the perimeter of the cabin, he found something that stopped him cold. Boot prints. Not his. He followed them through the pine needles and dead leaves to a clearing where tire marks cut into the dirt. At the center, a small red plastic flag, marker tape, the kind used by law enforcement or search teams. Someone had been here. Watching. Marking. When he returned to the cabin, he immediately dismantled the fire pit, scrubbed the soot trails, and buried any trash. They had maybe a day, maybe less, before someone followed that marker back. But as he cleaned, he realized something. Only 2 people knew the rough location of the cabin. Him and the sheriff. He hadn't made the call. But Carl already knew. Miller had found them another way. Maybe a drone, maybe a local hiker tipped off. But most likely, someone reported movement in the woods. And Miller had rerouted the tip directly to Carl. That night, the girls slept in shifts. John stood watch until dawn, rifle slung across his back, the fire extinguished, the silence eerie. By the following morning, John had made a decision. He couldn't rely on local law. Couldn't trust official channels. He had to expose Miller. Publicly. Irrefutably. He would lead Carl's men into a trap. Force a confrontation. Film the exchange. Send it directly to the only journalist he still trusted, a woman named Jenna Cole, who had once broken a child trafficking ring overseas with John's classified intel. But he needed bait. And Sheriff Miller was about to take the hook. At 10:17 a.m., the station phone rang. "This is John," he said calmly. "You tell Carl that if he wants the girls, he's gonna have to come get them himself." Silence. Then Miller spoke, voice flat. "Who is this?" "You already know." "I think you're confused, son. You sound like you're in some trouble." John's voice dropped. "Oh, I'm not the one who's going down." "But you are." "I've got files, I've got footage, and I've got the names of your buyers. You and Carl have one chance to make this clean. Come to Miller's Rock at sunset. No backup. Or I burn it all." He hung up. Then he turned to the girls. "It's time to end this." Carl Boone, the ruthless leader of an international human trafficking ring, was preparing for the biggest transaction of his life. He planned to sell the girls overseas to an organ trafficking syndicate, where the demand for body parts was soaring due to a severe shortage of legal donors. Time was slipping away. John had only 48 hours to get the girls to safety and bring down the network from the inside. What began as a pursuit had now turned into a race against time, one littered with deadly traps, flying bullets, and betrayals from people he once thought trustworthy. But John wasn't just fighting the criminals, he was battling ghosts from his own past. Once a government-sanctioned assassin for the CIA, John had taken part in covert black operations in South America, where a botched mission led him to accidentally kill an innocent family. Now, the two young girls reminded him of that tragedy, stirring buried guilt and forcing him to fight not only to protect the present, but to redeem himself. As he tried to plan his next move, John discovered an even deeper danger. The local police chief, Officer Miller, the very man he'd considered reporting to, was in fact Carl's inside man. Miller had been turning a blind eye to the disappearances for years. A single emergency call would have blown their location and sealed the fate of the girls. Now, John had no choice but to rely solely on his own skills, instincts, and grit. The clock was ticking. The sun broke through the treetops, but it wasn't warmth that bathed John's face, it was exhaustion, relief, and the pain of wounds both old and new. The girls were safe, for now. The deal had been stopped. Carl's empire was crumbling, and the files containing the names of every buyer and enabler were now in trusted hands. But justice wasn't complete, and neither was John's peace. As he watched the girls sleep in the back seat of a stranger's van bound for safety, John didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man who had finally taken the first step toward forgiving himself. The past would always haunt him, but for the first time, it no longer ruled him. Because in saving them, he had found something worth living for, and something worth dying to protect. The countdown had ended. But John's war was just beginning.